Bonjour, hi, hello, bienvenue, welcome. My name is Laura Beeston, and it's my pleasure to be moderating this next panel. Welcome to the third party's cybersecurity discussion. Today, we will be talking all about securing the supply chain. So that includes third parties, service providers, suppliers, and partners, and examining the challenges and solutions to maintaining security levels globally and over time. It is my pleasure to welcome to the stage Ron Brash, Erwin Braudier, and Catherine Nora China. So please give them a warm welcome. Okay, I thought we could start with some introductions. Catherine, can you tell me a bit about who you are and what you're working on?
Yeah, for sure.
It's on.
It's on, okay. I'm Catherine Nora China. I'm the CEO of B2 Cloud. So basically, we're a company which is providing cloud services recommendation around, application, infrastructure, and platform. And we are working in the topics of how can we improve the reliability of the cloud supply chain.
Great. Erwin?
Donc, bonjour à tous, c'est Erwan Brouder. Donc moi je suis directeur de la BU Cybersécurité de Soprasteria. Donc Soprasteria, nous sommes une société française internationale avec un siège en France à Paris et des filiales en Europe, en Asie et en Amérique du Nord. Et à peu près 1500 consultants spécialisés en cybersécurité et une volonté assez forte de se développer en Amérique du Nord et notamment dans la région de Québec et de Montréal. Voilà, enchanté.
Hello, I'm Ron Brash. I'm the VP of Technology and Technical Research and Integrations at Adolis Technology. What does that mean? Well, I do a lot of things. So I've worked in just about every industry now in the industrial spectrum, site assessments to reverse engineering to PCBs to working on supply chain and looking at all the inadequate risk management and associations that we've been working at in our current product selections. And kind of on a colloquial note, I'm actually known as the Canadian APT to a number of agencies in the United States. So kind of on a friendly note, I'm looking forward to this conversation today about supply chain, which is one of my biggest passions.
Great. Okay, so let's start there. I'm hoping we can contextualize this topic for our audience first, and you can explain why the supply chain is a prime target for cyber criminals and what's keeping you up at night these days. We can start with you, Ron.
What's keeping me up? So if you think the average product that you go buy, you think you're doing business with one vendor, you're doing business with about 100 to maybe 500 more. And most of those, there's no origin tracing, there's no vulnerability management on the components in those products. That is probably my biggest fear, and then that's one system of all the systems that are talking to each other. So that is what really keeps me up. And most programmers, security is not their thing.
Okay. Erwan, est-ce qu'il y a des choses qui vous donnent peur dans le supply chain? Pourquoi est-ce que c'est un target pour cybercriminals?
Alors, en fait, c'est une opportunité pour les cybercriminels d'avoir une surface d'attaque plus importante. Et d'une certaine manière, ça peut permettre en fait d'avoir des actions également différentes en fait sur une entreprise. Un exemple, vous vous retrouvez dans une industrie avec une nécessité en fait d'avoir une logistique rapide en flux tendu. Bah, si vous perturbez en fait la chaîne logistique, vous allez perturber les activités de l'entreprise sans perturber directement le système d'information. C'est un exemple, mais c'est ce que va permettre en fait la supply chain.
Anything to add, Catherine?
I will give only one number. 66% of the target group in the cybersecurity are the supply chain, the third party, and the supplier. So, you know, the challenge is really related to supply chain in the cyber attacks.
Okay. So there are many types of third-party risk categories: financial, compliance, environmental, operational, of course, reputational, and probably the most expensive, cybersecurity. So with all of these considerations, what do you believe that risk leaders should prioritize when trying to wrap their arms around this stuff? We can start with you, Erwin.
Oui, alors ce qui moi me fait peur en fait avec la supply chain, c'est un risque dont on parle assez régulièrement quand même, c'est le risque systémique d'interruption d'activité. C'est-à-dire qu'on va passer par un sous-traitant, on va mettre à terre ce sous-traitant et on va complètement arrêter l'activité d'une entreprise. Évidemment, après, en impact, les impacts financiers, les impacts contractuels, juridiques, enfin tout ça, mais on reste vraiment sur un risque, pour moi, qui est systémique. Donc il faut savoir de quelle manière, avec ce sous-traitant, avec cette supply chain, on sera en capacité de l'isoler en cas d'incident et de continuer l'activité en cas d'incident.
Okay, what kind of information should be reported and gathered? I don't know if you want to go next. What should be prioritized by risk leaders in this space?
There's a lot of information to gather as a risk assessment. We are working in two dimensions, what we call first the transparency posture of your provider. I mean, how do you know what kind of information that you can get from your provider, your supplier, on the transparency side? What kind of certification, security certification, what kind of stack they are using? But this is what I call the transparency posture. And there's another dimension which is very important, is the reliability posture. Okay. So how can you trust your provider? Because as everyone said, this is about all the supply chain, and there is a risk which is a global risk. So you have to assess every part of the chain, every part of the value chain. Transparency and reliability. This is two dimensions.
Ron, what about you? How do you advise risk leaders to get their arms around all of that complexity?
I mean, I would jokingly say fire the ineffective leadership, but that probably isn't so acceptable. There's kind of two parts to that. One is understanding and changing the way we build products. That it's going to be a very insurmountable challenge, but it's going to be one of the most effective pieces that we have to take care of.
Okay.
We have to take care of the way that we build products and the products around that. So if you take SolarWinds, for example, SolarWinds was an avenue to get into many different types of assets in a much way, an easier fashion. What people forgot to tell you is there was a little thing called JetBrains involved there that was kind of one of the main pieces there, and that came from Russia. You won't hear that very often being said out loud, but that's one of those pieces. Supply chain is invasive, and it is everywhere and systemic. We need to have a good understanding of the suppliers, but also the other types of audiences that need to consume the risk management information. So suppliers being one, OEMs are really integrators. You have integrators and service providers, and you have asset owners. And all of those will have a very different case of what kind of information they're looking at and how they're going to apply it. And if you're an asset owner, you're limited to compensating controls. You're limited to having to trust and validate. There's so many different pieces around all of those areas that we'll need to extend. Now, the good news is that if you have a reasonably high level of maturity, you'll have a third-party risk group. Supply chain will be an extension of that, so that's good. You don't have to go find more budget necessarily. You already have the vehicles in place. But really, we just need to change the way we're doing those things and what types of information that we're going to be validating at a far more technical-backed way versus blatantly trusting our vendors.
Okay. Anything to add? I don't know.
Oui, et ce que je trouve relativement important également, c'est de se dire que dans nos relations avec notre chaîne de partenaires, on doit mettre en place une chaîne de confiance. Si jamais on a un de ces partenaires qui est défaillant d'un point de vue sécurité, il ne faut pas spécialement le montrer du doigt parce que d'une certaine manière notre tour va venir. Il faut plutôt l'accompagner, être prêt avec tout un tas de tests, tout un tas de procédures qu'on aura pu mettre en place au préalable pour pouvoir réagir et avoir une vraie relation de partenariat pour, face à la menace, face à cette attaque, à cet événement, on puisse réagir ensemble et avoir une relation qui nous permette de se dire les choses, de communiquer et d'aller au plus vite pour limiter l'impact pour l'entreprise. Et ça, c'est une notion qui est relativement, pour moi, importante, qui n'est pas que du contrôle ou de l'audit ou l'évaluation d'un niveau de sécurité, montrer du doigt une défaillance. Non, on est une chaîne et on doit être solide par rapport à cette menace.
I'm super happy that you brought up trust. This was my next question is, how do you advise company leaders and companies themselves to be proactive about building that trustful relationship, and to ask for oversight and to sort of build these relationships so there are less risks. Catherine, do you have any ideas?
The first point is, how do you define the trust?
Hey, you're looking at me and I'm not sure, but
Really? Do you have some metrics to define the trust? Because the trust is a kind of, have you said, is human-based. This is not IT-based or technical-based. This is human-based. So the way to define the trust is to build metrics. But the trust is not only technical, it's also financial, it's also related to governance. So that's what we did basically in our company. We have built 102 value of trust related to the supply chain. This is the only way to provide with some, recommendation around the trust, because the trust it's so, this is tricky.
yeah, you need to
To
set some KPIs.
Yeah, you have to set KPI. Yeah.
Ron, would you like to jump in?
Well, I mean, trust is, I agree with the sentiment of it, but if you've ever been through a PCI audit, it just means theater. And if you can trick your auditor, that means that you're doing those things kind of right. So I do recommend, and I understand the rules around compliance and GRC and all, and those are very useful things to make sure there's a certain level of quality and a certain level of trust and health. But really, when you're watching those things, you can trust someone as much as you want, and you could see them every day, but they could still be doing something behind your back. And with supply chain, that's kind of the inherent thing, is there's lots of stuff going on behind your back, whether that's your partners, your outsourcing, the products you're using, and their contributors. There's a lot there to be said about what is trust and how far you're willing to go through that validation exercise for trust.
Okay, I'm glad you brought that up. You're all segueing beautifully into my next questions. If you as a company do not have total ownership or control over a third party, and they are doing things beside you or out of eyesight, how can you implement standards, risk expectation, and requirements? How do you put those in place if they're an arm length away from you? Anyone can jump in.
We are building the matrices.
Okay.
So we are building the matrices, and we are just finding the use case. And we're working with our customer, we're working with the partner, we're working with the supplier, and we just ask them, okay, are you okay with that? To make the job and to try to build this new value chain, this new trusted value chain. So basically, it works with some company. With our company, they don't want to be scored. They don't want to give some transparency. They don't want to give some data around reliability. They don't want to make the job. You cannot convince anyone. That's the tricky part of the.
And what do you do in those cases? Do you end the relationship? Do you?
I do.
You do? Okay.
I'm kidding. No, I try to improve the things.
Okay.
I try to improve things. But sometimes I don't have any choice than to just stop the relationship.
Okay.
If I found that, I suppose that there is no trust enough around security, around all the stuff that were the topics we have discussed, sometimes you have to, because as everyone said, this is systemic, this is all the supply chain which can be impacted because of one partner or one supplier. So we have to make a choice.
Would you like to jump in?
Oui, l'entreprise, en fait, elle doit faire son analyse de risque, identifier ses processus critiques, ses applications critiques, les partenaires critiques dans son activité. Et d'une certaine manière, elle doit éviter des points, des SPOF, en fait, des entreprises qui seraient complètement, dont elle serait complètement dépendante. Au maximum, elle doit l'éviter, en fait. Après, elle aura deux choix, soit elle pourra en mettre d'autres en concurrence et finalement se dérisquer, soit elle sera obligée en fait d'intégrer uniquement cette entreprise-là et elle devra mettre des processus, des applications, enfin tout un tas de choses pour se dérisquer face à une attaque autour de ça. Mais ce qui est important de dire, c'est que oui, l'outil, la métrique, ça va permettre d'évaluer un certain nombre de choses sur une matrice qu'on pourra établir par rapport aux risques qu'on aura identifiés pour l'entreprise. Je ne crois pas du tout au générique et je pense que ça ne servira à rien. il faut quelque chose qui soit adapté à une typologie d'entreprise, mais ce ne sera pas suffisant. Pour revenir à ce que vous disiez sur la confiance, c'est pas quelque chose qui se décrète, qui se détermine ou qui s'évalue en fait. C'est une relation qui s'installe à un moment donné et qui s'entretient. C'est comme un couple. C'est comme un couple d'une certaine manière. Ces entreprises-là, elles doivent établir une relation dans la durée avec parfois des moments qui vont bien, des moments qui vont moins bien, mais une certaine solidarité en fait face à l'adversité. Et c'est vraiment ça, pour moi, la confiance qu'on doit établir en fait à l'intérieur. Et pour pouvoir répondre à ces risques qui auront été identifiés et qui doivent être traités par l'entreprise.
Anything to add? Okay.
Well, I could pick the ball up on that one. So I think if you're in enterprise and you're in banks and you're in commodity software, it's really easy to think about how you're going to change or end your relationships. You can go to another vendor, find another solution, no problem. But when you're dealing with physical assets that you've made a substantial investment in, then that becomes a lot trickier. Sometimes you have to sleep in the bed until that asset is retired, unfortunately. So it kind of becomes maintaining a relationship with a vendor that might not be so great. You'll have to put controls around that and manage the risks and impacts. But simultaneously, it'll be a two-prong approach where on your second one, if you're going to procurement with a new vendor, now you can start to change the relationship early on, right? So if you've ever been through divorces and all that type of stuff, right? Sometimes you got to maintain a relationship over here, but while you move on to the new one, you don't want to carry that same baggage into the equation. So you're going to put in and say, I need to have all of these things done in the right way. We're going to change the way that we do business. And that won't stop you from maybe finding a new solution. But if for prior assets, like if you're going to build for a heavy crude, a $1 billion cracker, you can't change that equation after you went down that journey. It's really hard to. So if you're going to build a new substation or something along those lines, then you can start to change the behavior on something net new, starting at procurement, starting at RFP, and you can start introducing your new guidance, and maybe you can start retroactively applying your inter-service agreements and all of those criteria later on. But there's kind of a twofold, depending on where you are and what type of industry you're in.
Okay. So beyond fixing the relationship or buttressing the relationship, I'm curious what kind of solutions or stress tests or processes really excite you in the space today. Anyone can jump in? Anyone?
Du coup, les tests en fait qu'on va pouvoir faire sur cette partie-là, ça va être, moi je parlais tout à l'heure d'entreprises dans la chaîne d'approvisionnement qui peuvent être critiques. Ça va être d'éteindre une de cette chaîne pour voir si nos processus vont pouvoir basculer en fait sur un autre. Voir si on va être en état de faire basculer les équipes dans une relation avec un autre type d'entreprise. Ça peut être ce type de relation. Alors c'est vrai que dans le milieu bancaire par exemple, on a l'habitude de faire ce type de test parce que c'est demandé en fait par les banques centrales qui ont fait elles-mêmes leur analyse de risque face à des risques systémiques. Mais on pourrait très bien avoir la même chose à l'échelle d'autres entreprises dans d'autres secteurs pour s'organiser.
And you were saying something earlier, Ron, about sort of making scenario planning for your worst day. I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about that.
Oh boy. Yeah, just quote a gentleman named Andy Bachman. It's cyber-informed consequence-based engineering. It basically means plan for your worst day. And he's moved over to climate type stuff now, and that's cool. He's off doing his thing, but it's really about engineering what your worst day looks like. And I'm a very pragmatic person. I live in Quebec, and what's the worst thing that's going to happen to me? I wind up in a snowbank driving my car and get stuck, right? The tow truck can't come. So I plan, I put a blanket in the car, I put a candle in a tin can. I think about and I manage my risk in a certain way. That type of stuff really makes me excited, but really what's starting to excite me is the extra visibility into what's going on in the products. And I mean that in a positive way, because we need to rethink about what is a vulnerability and what is exploitability as well. So for those of you who've been watching what's coming out, every other week there's a new set of vulnerabilities. Now with SBOM, software bills and materials, with decomposing products and all those things, you wind up with a lot of false positives. How we're going to re-evaluate that stuff, how we're going to determine exposure, criticality of our assets, how we manage that with minimal amount of people. Those are fundamentally really challenging exercises, but they're also very exciting because it's going to change the way that we do risk management today and how we buy products and how we maintain them and transition from them. I think we're in a really exciting spot if we plan for the worst days.
Okay, great. It sounds to me like there isn't quite a silver bullet in a system that's so complex. So my question is, are breaches inevitable? And is it even possible to maintain the security level of supply chains?
I hope so.
Yeah.
Definitely. But we have to think in a different way.
Okay.
I like this expression, you have to think out of the box. You have to think out of the security box
Okay.
at a higher level, at the strategic and governance level.
Okay.
As I said, this is not only tech related.
Right.
This is related to your processes, the way your governance, the way you are managing your company, the people, everything. So if you only think that you're gonna solve your issue with some tools, even with the best tools, this is pointless. You have to change the overall way of thinking in your company. And it will be very, very difficult because this is, cultural. In some country, it's easy to do, I am sure. In France, basically, changing mentality, oh my God, it can take years. So, but this is an option. You have to do it.
And
definitely.
which way do you think the thinking needs to go? Is this bottom up or is this coming top down culturally, I mean, in companies? What are you seeing being the point where, there isn't that understanding across a company culture?
It depends of the country you operate.
Okay.
In France, it's always from, the top. It's not from the bottom because we have a very, very, very vertical management. But in some country, you can make it on the transversal way, so it can be easy. There is no, there is no best solution. There is no only one option. We have to work on it and collectively, and you have to be able to change your mind and to think that there is only shared responsibility. I give you an instance in the cloud computing, for instance, if you want to switch from one to another cloud operator because you think that one of the cloud provider is not trusted enough, it's very, very difficult.
Okay.
Because your data are located with this operator, with this provider, and if you want to switch, this is a kind you have to think about what about my data portability? Okay, I have invested so many money in this infrastructure, so I have to. How do I exit my contract? So it's very, very difficult. And it can cost you a lot of money if you want to switch from another provider. So we have to work on it on the regulatory side. We have to provide some maybe new regulation that give you the opportunity, like in the telephony, for instance, when you want to switch from one operator to another operator, you can switch very easily. Mm-hmm. Maybe we can have to provide some new regulation that give you the opportunity to easily switch from one to another provider and to keep safe with your data. That's
great.
Yeah, very important.
And I have a question for you, Erwin. I'm curious what you think companies need to do and how they ought to react in case of a cyber attack. And I'm curious if you can share what your company learned from its cyber attack.
Oui, alors, vous n'êtes pas sans savoir, notamment pour les Français, que Soprasteria a subi une cyberattaque il y a quelques années. Et donc c'est public, c'est quelque chose qui a profondément traumatisé l'entreprise et qui a permis en fait à un certain nombre de remises en question, de projets pour se transformer. Et ce que je peux partager en fait finalement avec vous, c'est que cette attaque et la réaction en fait finalement qui en a été faite a été unanimement saluée par nos clients, par nos partenaires comme étant bien gérée. C'est pas moi qui le dis, c'est vraiment l'ensemble de nos clients. Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé en fait, au moment où l'attaque a été détectée? Une des premières choses qui a été plutôt bien faite, c'est de débrancher notre système d'information. Alors vous allez me dire, oui, comment ça, vous avez débranché votre système d'information? Oui, on a mis ce jour-là 48 000 personnes au chômage technique. On a débranché nos serveurs, le système d'information était éteint. La deuxième chose, et ça a été possible parce que ça a été une décision de la direction générale. C'est-à-dire que le président a pris la décision de protéger ses clients. La deuxième réaction, hein, ça a été d'appeler l'ensemble des RSSI et de ses clients pour expliquer ce qui se passait et de leur dire, vous inquiétez pas, on va comprendre ce qui s'est passé, on ne le sait pas encore, on va le comprendre, mais en attendant, on a débranché et vous serez mis au courant de tout ce qui va se passer. Donc la transparence, c'est ça qui a aussi été important. Et la troisième phase, ça a été de comprendre ce qui se passait, je dirais, traiter la source de l'incident et de pouvoir rétablir les éléments les plus critiques du système d'information. Ça a mis presque un mois en fait à tout rétablir. Je crois qu'on parle de 6000 serveurs. Et finalement, nos clients avec qui on a communiqué, on a parlé de nos difficultés, des leurs aussi, en essayant de remettre leurs systèmes les plus critiques également en marche, sont devenus des partenaires. Donc c'est ce que je disais un petit peu en introduction, c'est que ils nous ont considéré en fait que le fait qu'on ait communiqué et que l'incident ait été bien géré, ça a permis de mettre en place une relation plus forte dans le temps. Et aujourd'hui, c'est vrai que on essaie en fait de partager en fait ce retour-là et de mettre vraiment l'accent sur la nécessité de communiquer, de ne pas cacher les choses, vraiment de communiquer sur ce qui se passe. Et on arrive à trouver avec de l'intelligence collective des solutions.
Anything to add? The other two about how to
Transparency.
react? Yeah.
Transparency, it's the key.
Yeah.
I would say on the part to react to it all, again, it depends on what industry and what you're doing. So how you handle a breach in finance and IT is going to be very different than how you handle on an industrial asset. If you're going to do disaster recovery planning and business continuity planning in industrial assets, you do not let enterprise and corporate handle it. That actually causes more problems in coming up safely or safe shutdowns than it does if you included them in the first place. So don't be like Maersk. Use industrial professionals in the beginning and include those individuals in your plan, and that will help you with your breaches to maintain what we call SRP, safety, reliability, and productivity. So again, depending on your audience and your group, how you treat a breach and how you deal with those things are very different.
I have a question about the global nature of third-party relationships. I'm curious how you approach if you have a third-party vendor that might be located in an area that has relatively young cyber maturity, and how you go about sort of fortifying those relationships. Anybody can jump in.
It's tricky. So, but I can give you the same answer. It's not take related. It's about trust. It's about financial stability.
Okay.
Because if you're a young company, for instance, you are a startup, you can just operate for 1, 2, and then you shut down about 3 years. So how can you go on with this kind of relationship? It's very... So you have to build metrics around financial. We are building metrics around security, certification, regulation, and financial.
Yeah.
This is the way to improve our relationship and say, okay, maybe we're not gonna work with this kind of company because they don't have the financial stability. I know this is difficult to say that, but this is the only way to work in a safety way.
Ron, you looked like you wanted to jump in.
No, I'm going to actually echo Catherine's statement, because as a researcher, one of the hardest things we've had dealing with big incumbent Fortune 200 vendors is that they don't like hearing about their dirty skeletons. And maybe that comes back to the ineffectual management and product development strategies that they've used. But being a researcher that doesn't go and broadcast and say claims like, oh, $10 million affected, and let my marketing campaign get ahead of that, being constructive, talking with them and helping them mature their organization or mature product lines, because maybe you won't be able to change the world in one day, that has been the most effectual piece that I've had as a researcher and as someone who helps people. I'm not saying that always works out well. Sometimes you'll still get their chief of legal on the phone on the other side, but being proactive and helping them show the right way, choose next time, don't use that library, use this one, help them with their design choices. You might not get what you want in 6 months, you might get it in the next 3 years, but that has been the most collaborative way to improve product quality. And coming at it honestly and transparently early on, I think is the right way to go about talking with certain vendors that generally sue you into the ground for trying to talk about it. Or they'll even threaten your project stability when you want to do a very big multi-million-dollar investment. They say, oh, well, how dare you? Go talk to ABC vendor over here then. And then you'll be like, oh, my project's off by 3 years and the shareholders won't be happy. So you have to work with kind of the devil that you know, but you try to reduce that evil based off the impacts that you can kind of work around.
Et moi, je parlais de la confiance, évidemment, dans la chaîne d'approvisionnement, mais il faut quand même garder un élément en tête, c'est que vous avez à un moment donné une entreprise qui a des clients en face, et cette confiance en fait que va leur accorder le client, donc sur un bien, sur un service, sur quelque part le client, lui, il ne la délègue pas à la supply chain. Donc l'entreprise qui fait face au client reste d'une certaine manière responsable. Donc on parlait de risque aussi à un moment donné tout à l'heure. Là, on a quand même un risque d'image qu'il ne faut surtout pas oublier en fait. Et c'est vrai que c'est un équilibre qui n'est pas simple. Devoir contrôler sa supply chain, je pense que ça reste indispensable. Je peux compléter le propos de tout à l'heure, mais ce n'est pas suffisant. En fait, si on n'établit pas cette relation de partenariat et de confiance avec la supply chain, il manque quelque chose, il va manquer un bout. Et l'entreprise qui est responsable va peut-être ne pas aller jusqu'à le traitement de cette responsabilité. En fait. Donc il faut vraiment garder ça en tête.
Okay. So before we open up the floor to questions, do you have any final thoughts or headlines or takeaways that you'd like to share with the audience before we open up the mic?
I think that the most challenges in the upcoming years will be the supply chain, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. When we're talking about cyber attacks, what happened to SolarWinds, what's happened in France to the Corbeil-Essonnes hospital, I don't know if you heard about it. And yesterday there was another news which was impacting the supply chain. I think this is the most challenges of the next year. How are you going to protect your supply chain? That's it, I think so.
Okay,
really.
so just keep this front of mind, every business leader.
Ouais, pour moi, le challenge, il est vraiment au moment où l'incident survient, dans la vitesse de réaction et dans la communication qui va se faire autour. Après, la remise en état, ça prendra le temps que ça prendra, mais si on n'a pas ces deux éléments-là, on n'arrivera pas on va perdre de la confiance et on va perdre du temps. Et le temps, on sait que dans ce genre d'attaque, c'est essentiel.
Critical.
Yeah, your supply chain attacks are going through the roof. If you look at open source, they're up 600 and something% this year alone.
Wow.
Just from that stat. Just think about that. And that's only a small section of what you do know. Now, with the focus on supply chain, be aware that your risk register is going to grow immensely. Your vulnerability swamp will be gigantic. It'll be the size of New Orleans kind of thing. It will just grow. And you'll have to instead throw your hands up in the air. It's like buying a used car when all the lights are on. Instead of throwing your hands up in the air, focus on what matters to you, on the crown jewels, the assets that generate revenue, that continue to generate your revenue, and you focus very pragmatically and think about the cascading risks and you'll get out alive. But for the next 3, 5 years, maybe 10 years, be aware that your risk registers and all of your executive dashboards are going to look all red. Hands down, all red. It's a very unfortunate truth.
Okay, ominous warning, but that's the way it is. You heard it here first. With that, we've got about 10 minutes left. So there's a mic or a hand can go up. Please ask your questions.
Okay, question. How does software or hardware liability play into this?
Oh.
Hardware liability.
So are you saying like if we had an IoT device and a key was compromised on it, could I guarantee the integrity of said device?
No, I'm saying like if you buy a baby stroller and there's a problem with it, if you buy a vehicle and there's a problem with it, there's a recall, there's liability for the manufacturer. We currently don't have that in software and most hardware. Mm-hmm. It's being discussed. How does that play into this?
Well, there's certainly going to be a push for more legislation. I think that's where we're starting to see the interest, and that's on consumer products. We could also say we're also seeing it on right to fix, but there's a whole set of problems around there. I don't think anyone's going to accurately want to talk about that in public because it might open up the courts to going after individuals who are making decisions for the last 5-10 years. So I think you'll see a lot of pushback on going about liabilities for hardware and software. And how do you go after an open source group for what code they wrote? How do you go after the maintainers for NumPy? How do you know who the biggest contributors for NumPy are in this room? Chinese agents. Hate to say it, that's true. Can you actually prove and validate that their work and their machine learning algorithms is going to introduce a risk to you? How are you going to own that? How are you going to defend yourself in court? There's a lot of liability discussions to be opened up. Supply chain is the start of a very epic legal debate.
Okay.
I don't know, can you hear me?
Oh,
Yeah.
It worked. So when we're talking about third parties, we're just not only during the acquisition time, but also when we already established the relationship, how do we keep that relationship secure? How often we ask questions to our third parties? How often, and if you have a lot of third parties included in your supply chain, how do you manage that to keep it secure after you already made the deal? Was it clear?
good question.
Yeah, it is clear.
Yeah, or how do you, I guess it's about if you have so many relationships, how do you manage and how often do you check up on your partners, essentially?
I can answer for my company. What we are doing is just we are trying to work with a few part of supplier and partner. The idea is to consolidate. You have to consolidate your supply chain, not to work with too many. We are in the cloud computing. Too many cloud supplier, too many platform, too many SaaS. Because each time it's the risk that you are introducing in your companies. This is you have to manage this at the organizational side and the strategical side. So this is only an option. Do you want to work with 1,000 supplier or only 100 or only 10? The more you are working with, the more risk you are taking.
Oui, on peut aussi imaginer ça à plusieurs niveaux. Avoir déjà une évaluation du niveau de sécurité de ses fournisseurs, on le disait avec une matrice qui peut être adaptée à une entreprise, mais enfin, on a déjà ce premier niveau-là. Deuxième niveau, on a l'assurance. Si le fournisseur est défaillant, bah, on peut peut-être limiter l'impact avec une assurance. Et le troisième niveau, on a les aspects contractuels et juridiques, bon, qui sont des réponses, mais qui ne s'affranchissent pas, et je réinsiste dessus, de la confiance qu'on peut avoir avec ce fournisseur-là. Et ce fournisseur-là, ce fournisseur, on va avoir un niveau de confiance à partir du moment où on aura une relation qui va s'établir dans le temps. Ça ne s'établit pas le 1er janvier pour le 2 janvier. C'est cette relation qui va s'établir dans le temps. Voilà. Donc je pense que c'est important d'avoir ça en tête.
Anything to add?
And I think that I agree with everything that's being said. So I think it also depends on your risk appetite. What are the levels that you're willing to tolerate? What is the level of dependence on that relationship that you have? Is it an incumbent vendor that is the only people that know how to revive or to start and keep that turbine or safety system running? Those are very different aspects than somebody you're using to outsource your phishing campaigns to. So it really depends on the level of need, the level of intensity and impact that relationship has in your organization. And that might spur how frequent your touch points are with them, how thorough your investigations are with them. Academic paper-based gap assessments probably won't cut it if it's someone who's on your site or in your facility regularly and applying patches. So again, it really depends on how and what your relationships will be, and I think that will change to the young lady's question really a little bit in addition to the contractual terms and so forth.
Okay, so every relationship needs to be looked at a little differently,
Yeah.
uniquely. Okay, I think we have time for one more question.
Merci. Alors, j'écoutais la GRC ce matin et disait qu'il y a beaucoup de réticence au niveau des entreprises à exposer les cyberattaques qu'on subit. Et là, vous parlez beaucoup de confiance, de transparence. Jusqu'où va cette transparence, confiance, quand il s'agit de divulgation publique? Comment vous gérez ça dans la chaîne d'approvisionnement?
Du coup, je réponds en français.
Oui.
Je vous réponds en français. Alors, au niveau européen, en tout cas, il faut savoir que c'est une obligation de la loi de la protection des données. Vous avez 72 heures pour divulguer une cyberattaque. Si vous ne le faites pas, vous pouvez avoir une amende qui représente une somme importante. Je crois que c'est 1% du chiffre d'affaires. Donc, au niveau européen, c'est le RGPD, c'est acté. Je ne dis pas que c'est contrôlé au niveau de toutes les entreprises. En tout cas, voilà, quand on est pris la main dans le sac, ça peut être très très dommageable. Donc ça, c'est une première partie de la réponse à votre question. Après, pour la partie transparence, moi je pense que vous avez tout à fait raison. On a beaucoup parlé de transparence. Ça va être, il faut voir que toutes les sociétés jouent le jeu de cette transparence. Parce que la confiance ne peut pas se bâtir sans la transparence. Donc soit cette transparence, ça va être rendue obligatoire, ça sera dommage. On va faire des lois un peu partout. Et là, il y a une autre loi qui va arriver aussi bientôt, c'est la Cyber Resilience Act, qui est fait aussi par l'Union européenne, qui va imposer à tous les manufactures, tous les fabricants d'objets connectés, d'avoir cette transparence au niveau de leur certification de sécurité, au risque encore de ne pas être autorisé à avoir le label comment dire, CE, donc Europe, de ne pas pouvoir vendre leurs produits en Europe et d'avoir des amendes s'ils ne respectent pas cette transparence en termes de certification de sécurité. Donc on va être forcé de résoudre le problème par la loi, encore une fois. Alors soit le marché le fait de manière naturelle, c'est la meilleure option que le marché le fasse naturellement, d'être transparent, soit ça sera imposé par les régulations en cours.
La régulation en France, elle est assez complexe en fait autour de ça parce que ça va dépendre du type d'entreprise attaquée. C'est sûr qu'un OIV, donc un opérateur d'importance vitale, ne va pas avoir les mêmes obligations que le boulanger du coin, même si j'aime beaucoup mon boulanger. Et le type de données en fait qu'on va voler. Les données bancaires ont un cadre légal, les données personnelles en ont un autre, les données de santé en ont un autre, et finalement il y a assez peu de, c'est pas vraiment uniforme en fait. Donc il faut toujours se poser la question en fait quand on subit ce genre d'attaque. Déjà quel est le cadre légal autour de ça, et après être transparent par rapport aux clients. À nos clients, parce que finalement c'est eux qui peuvent subir l'impact. On pense à une donnée de santé, on pense à une donnée bancaire ou tout ça, donc ils ont peut-être des choses à faire pour se protéger eux-mêmes. On a nos partenaires, on est interconnectés, on a des données aussi qui leur appartiennent, donc peut-être qu'eux ont aussi en fait des impacts que nous on ne peut pas forcément évaluer, donc cette transparence vis-à-vis des partenaires. Et après, je dirais la pire, parce que celle-ci, c'est celle qu'on ne maîtrise pas après en termes de communication, c'est la transparence vis-à-vis du marché. C'est-à-dire que vous allez avoir en grande presse telle société a subi une cyberattaque. Ça peut créer un affolement, ça peut affoler les marchés avec vraiment une chute en fait des actions de l'entreprise. Et ça, on ne le maîtrise plus en fait à un moment donné. Donc à partir du moment où on a maîtrisé la chaîne autour de soi, on peut avoir à lancer ce pavé dans la mare sur le marché, mais là, on ne maîtrise plus en fait jusqu'à où ça peut arriver. Donc à partir du moment où on a maîtrisé le reste, on est en capacité de dire voilà ce qu'on a subi, voilà ce qu'on a fait, et on pense que le risque est maîtrisé. En tout cas, et ça montre une certaine maîtrise en fait.
Merci.
We have one more minute. I don't know if this person wants to ask a very quick question. Last question.
Oui, c'est une dernière question. En fait, depuis, on a parlé beaucoup de confiance, de transparence, mais je me positionne un peu dans la logique plus de gouvernance. Je n'ai pas le sentiment que la confiance, c'est un contrôle en tant que tel. Donc, est-ce que lorsqu'on va pour faire le choix d'un fournisseur, je me mets dans l'optique de l'info nuagique qui aujourd'hui prend beaucoup d'ampleur, est-ce qu'on va se fier juste à la confiance de ce fournisseur ou bien on ira plus, ou bien on mettra plus de contrôles en place pour s'assurer de cette fiabilité que le fournisseur va pouvoir nous fournir? Qu'est-ce que vous préconisez?
Il y a un dictateur, il y a un dictateur célèbre qui disait la confiance n'exclut pas le contrôle. Et c'est vrai que je pense que c'est un équilibre entre les deux. C'est on a des nécessités de mettre en place des contrôles, mais il faut, au fur et à mesure du temps, mettre en place cette relation de confiance. Et la confiance, ça se mesure pas. C'est quelque chose qui n'a pas de métrique.
Moi, je ne suis pas d'accord. Hein. La confiance, ça se mesure. La preuve, c'est que nous, on l'a fait. Bien sûr que la confiance, ça se mesure. Tout dépend de la question de savoir c'est comment on la mesure. La confiance, ça peut se mesurer. Et il y a beaucoup d'ailleurs de groupes qui travaillent sur cette notion de comment métrer la confiance, parce que c'est une donnée qui est purement subjective. Donc, d'accord, il n'y a pas plus subjectif que la notion de confiance. Mais la confiance, nous, appliquée au cloud computing, encore une fois, on est sur un périmètre qui est très, très, très restreint. Vous parliez de gouvernance, c'est un attribut qu'on a intégré dans nos matrices de confiance. La fiabilité, la transparence, le risque technologique, les certifications, les régulations. Donc, 102 valeurs on a intégrées dans nos matrices pour se rapprocher le plus possible d'une valeur de confiance qui puisse être audible par l'ensemble du marché, et encore une fois sur un périmètre qui est le cloud computing. Mais je suis vraiment contente d'entendre cette question sur la gouvernance, parce que la gouvernance, c'est un élément qui va être clé. La gouvernance des données, par exemple. Je sais qu'il y a une loi aussi au Québec qui travaille sur cette... il me semble que c'est la loi 25, c'est ça, si je ne me trompe pas. Donc, aux États-Unis, je rappelle que la FTC, c'est pas rien. La FTC est en train de s'inspirer du règlement européen sur la protection des données. On est vraiment dans cette mouvance-là. Et donc, la gouvernance va devenir un élément de plus en plus crucial, je pense.
Yeah, I mean, I missed a little bit of it just because I'm paraphrasing in my head and translating back to English on that question. But it really comes down to kind of, pardon my oil field type language, don't be an idiot. Buying products and manage risk doesn't have to have a whole set of prescriptive rules necessarily to manage your risks in supply chain. You can do it in a cost-effective way by making smart decisions, by applying a logical thought. This product has a lot of web-based features. There must be a lot of libraries in there. That means there's going to be lots of updates. You can kind of apply a certain pragmatic thinking to get ahead on any of these things, instead of just having really prescriptive requirements that no one necessarily will handle, like the 200 requirements to get to a certain level of maturity. So don't be an idiot, or apply a certain level of critical thinking is definitely going to be something that can give you a lot of power. But unfortunately, common sense isn't so common.
All right. That's all the time we have. Please join me in thanking our experts on this panel, Ron, Erwin, Catherine. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining us.